Hi, everyone. My name is Chip Hardwick. I'm the executive of the Synod of the Covenant, and I want to welcome you to this workshop on Christian nationalism presented by Tony Lin. I'll introduce him more fully in just a minute, but Tony, we're really glad that you're here with us. Thank you for what you'll offer us in advance. I want to welcome all of you who were here in person, as well as everyone who will be watching this on Zoom later. If you're a part of the Synod of the Covenant, you know I can't resist the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the Synod before I turn it over to Tony. And I'm going to do that now. I'm going to share my screen and I'll let you know what's going on in the life of the Synod that's coming up. All right. If you will let me know if you can see that. I see Brad and Spike and Liz. Do you see that yet?
No. Yep.
Yep, great. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yep.
Thank you. As many of you know, we have a monthly preaching workshop that's the first Wednesday of every month. Last February, Claudio Cavalles from Union Seminary in New York gave a really remarkable workshop on about prayer and how prayer should support our preaching. I loved it, and it's on our YouTube channel, so you can watch that there if you would like. You just go to YouTube and type in Synod of the Covenant, and there's a playlist for all of our preaching workshops. And then this coming in March, the first Wednesday of March, Dave Davis from Nassau Presbyterian Church in Princeton is leading a workshop on preaching from font to table. We have these workshops every first Wednesday. You'd be glad to join in at any point. So glad to have you. Also want to let you know, those of you who are part of the Synod of the Covenant, we are in the process of taking applications now for our Cultivating the Gift of Preaching program. It's a 18-month cohort program that's funded by a grant from the Lilly Endowment to help identify, train, and support emerging preachers. Liz is in the program. I see Liz. She's in this program. There might be others of you that are in the program now, but it will start in June, and we're hoping to have 30 or 35 people from throughout the Synod join. You can find more information about this on our website as well. We're also in the middle of beginning a new ministries in both artificial intelligence, thinking about the perils and possibilities of artificial intelligence, and also in peacemaking. If you would be interested in learning more about that or serving on a steering committee, so we put these ministries together, you could put something in the chat and with your email, and I'll follow up with you later. But thank you for, we're really excited about what we might do in these areas. God has given us in both areas about $100,000 to spend on new ministries. And so we're very eager to do that well and responsibly. If you're a teaching elder or a ruling elder in the Synod of the Covenant, you need to take boundaries training once every 3 years. We're offering boundaries training 9 times during the course of this year. There's 7 more left in 2026. So if you need boundaries training, I'd encourage you to sign up for that. And then this is hot off the presses. Just yesterday, I was able to put together our series on Christian nationalism for this year. Tony's presentation, this is the first one, but I wanted to tell you who else will be offering programs. Miranda Cruz will do the next one. It's tentatively April 30th in the afternoon on a typology of Christian nationalism. She's written this book called Faithful Politics about what does it mean to be a Christian and be a faithful Christian and a good citizen without entering into Christian nationalism. After that, David Congdon will be in June. He's a professor at the University of Kansas, and he's going to look at group identity and Christian nationalism and how politics has in a lot of ways replaced theology as a marker of in-groups and out-groups in Christian traditions. That'll be in June. Heath Carter who's a professor at Princeton Seminary in church history. He's going to do one of our preaching workshops. So this is an overlay between our preaching workshops and the Christian nationalism series on preaching in the midst of Christian nationalism. And then Reverend Dr. Vanetta West, whom Tony introduced me to, is going to lead a workshop. She was at the King Center in Atlanta, and she's going to lead a workshop on divesting from Christian nationalism, both as an individual and as a country. And that will be October 21st. Because you're here, you're going to get an email follow-up that will have all of the dates and all of the links for signing up for all of these. So those will come soon. But today I want to introduce you to Tony Lin. I'll give you the official introduction first. Tony Lin is a ordained Presbyterian pastor, trained as a cultural sociologist. He studied at the University of Virginia for his PhD. And he's currently the Associate Director and Director of Research at the Center for Public Theology and Public Policy at Yale Divinity School. William Barber was the initial leader of this, and he handpicked Tony and tracked him down until he finally said yes to come in to work with him as the presumed successor to Dr. Barber's leadership there. Tony worked at Trinity Wall Street, most recently doing all of your leader formation there, right, Tony? Um,
Hmm.
yeah, when he was
Yeah.
serving at that church and lives in New York City. And Tony and I were got to know each other 30 years ago in 1996 when we lived on the same
Yeah.
dorm hallway at Princeton Seminary. And it's been such a joy to keep in touch with him over the years and to touch base with him. I saw that he had preached a sermon on this topic, and I was really eager to offer something in Christian nationalism to the Synod. And our conversations have led to this larger series. And the only thing that I don't like about Tony Lin is that he looks the same as he did in 1996. And I look 30 years older. So other than that, I really love Tony Lin. If you just, I'll pray for Tony in this time, but if you need to contact me, here's my information. Nobody else listens to my voicemail messages or reads my email. So I'd be glad to hear from you if there's a way that I can support your presbytery or your church or you. So before I turn it over to Tony, let's open our time together in prayer. Gracious God, we are thankful for the chance to learn from Tony. We pray, God, that you would open our ears, open our hearts, that we would, um, by the power of your Holy Spirit, be more faithful at the end of our time together than we are today. God, open our hearts that we would hear the voice and the things you have to say to us through Tony. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen. Let's give Tony some happy
Amen.
hands and welcome him to here. So, Tony, we're so glad that you're here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's so great to finally we get to work together. We've known each
Yeah.
other all these years. We haven't worked together until now. So I guess authoritarianism did something for us.
We'll do it again in
Something good.
2056. We'll do it again in
That's right.
2056.
And I look the same. So, well, thank you. Thank you so much for signing up. So to all of you who are taking time to join in this in what I think are some of my reflections. This is not going to be a place where you saw the rundown of all the other workshops. So you'll get more nuanced breakdown of Christian nationalism and what it does. I'm here. I'm trying to I'm hoping to offer a larger overview of the cultural structures, and then I'm more interested in figuring out together what it means to be faithful under under our current moment, right? So this is not going to be a place where I critique Christian nationalism. There are plenty of places, and all of you are Presbyterian, so you read books. You can go read those books to figure out, and they're important critiques, right? I don't want to dismiss them, but it's just not going to be what I'll focus on. What I want to focus on today are really two big parts, but the second part has two elements. So the first section, I want to talk about what the cultural background for Christian nationalism and what it really is, and help us to understand the nuance of what that means. And then the second part, which I hope we can focus on more, is how to be faithful And in that, I want to talk about the importance of evangelism and of mutual aid, the practice of mutual aid and collective care and support. And so I encourage you to so because there are so many people, the raising hands might get a bit chaotic. So if you can write your questions in the chat, Chip can help monitor that. But I definitely want to hear from you because we are living through times where most of us didn't think we were going to be at this moment in this country, and so we essentially we need a new canon, right? You know, more than 10 years ago, almost 15 years ago now, when I was at the University of Virginia, I ran a group, uh, uh, a small group of some practitioners, but mostly scholars. We call it the Race, Faith, and Culture Initiative. And even at that meeting, almost 15 years ago, we were talking about the need for a new canon. We don't have the books that could help us understand what was happening in those days. We didn't have the even the theology to help us to ground us in many of our practices in those days. And it's the same for today. Much of what we're experiencing today, I'm sure that's part of the reason why many of you have taken the time to be here. We just don't know what to do because we didn't think we were going to be where we are right now. And so in addition to questions and comments of what I said, I would encourage you, if there are things that I say that you hope that I or others who might watch this can go deeper into, please put it in the chat, and I'll be, you know, everything I say today, it's I've gotten from other people or through other people. There's a large group of scholars who have been thinking about this and and getting together. I get together with quite a few other people to think carefully about these things. So yeah, so please help me think about what's most useful to the church. So let's to begin, the idea of Christian nationalism. I'm sure many of you have heard that Christian nationalism is not really Christian, and as from a sociological perspective, as a sociologist, I prefer to use the term religious nationalism rather than Christian nationalism. From and Emil Durkheim, right, in one of the founding fathers of sociology, he calls a religion could be anything, right? Anything, any moral value that tries to have separate between the sacred and the profane, and so in by that definition, many things could be religion, and I think that's what we're seeing today, right? Religious nationalism, it's beyond just national pride. It's nationalism often is grounded in symbols, what they're kind of called totems, right? And the religious nationalism is often more powerful than race-based nationalism because you almost don't have to prove, you know, you're always having to find the rationale for superiority. And in by 2026, the idea of racial superiority has been pretty much dismantled. There are many people still clinging on to it, but it's very hard to justify, right? Very hard to justify that your skin color determines your ability, your intelligence. This was not the case, you know, even 50 years ago, right? You know, so-called science supported um, the superiority of races, but today not so much, right? So there is the religious nationalism now is pushing the moral values, right, to lift up the superiority of a nation. And there are many different forms of nationalism, and not all of it has to be negative, right? I'm from Argentina. And in Argentina, there's a saying que el argentino nace donde quiere, right? There are certain things you do as an Argentinian, right? Drinking mate, the passion for football, the mannerism. If you know Argentinians, we're very unique. And if you have those elements, right, you're considered Argentinian, no matter even if it looks like me, right? So there are different forms of nationalism that is not all negative, and we have to remember that. But today, the challenge we're facing is that there are many understandings of nationalism, specifically religious nationalism, and that's a larger cultural problem that we have. That we all use the same words, but the words no longer mean the same thing, right? So in America in 2026 we we might all speak English, but the definitions of our words no longer means the same thing. And you can apply this across the spectrum. And that's why for me, I don't think it's very productive to just tell people Christian nationalism is wrong because you don't know what they think Christian nationalism is, right? What they think is Christian nationalism might might not be what you think, right? What they think is Christianity, obviously, might not be, it clearly is not what you think Christianity is. So starting at the critique of that when the definition are so different is not very helpful, right? And it's like trying to tell somebody, the debate with racism, right? Last week the president shared a video where the Obama's faces were put on monkeys, and there were people saying that that was not racist, right? If you if your understanding of racism is that you own slave, you call somebody the N-word, right? If it's so narrow, then okay, if that's your definition, that's fine, right? And I think he posted a video of him, a bunch of pictures of him with black people to show that he's not racist. If that's your definition of racism, right, then there's nothing you can tell somebody who believes that they're racist. If your definition includes the entire history of racism in America, clearly it's very hard to justify that was not a racist video, right? And we see the differences in definition in even with what's happening in ICE, right? I mean, David Shin is in Minneapolis. He's living this on the front lines. But there are people who believe that the ICE agents legitimately have the right and the need to cover their faces because otherwise they'll be doxxed and harassed, right? But if you understand the history of the people who did these things, there was another group in America in the South who also needed to cover their faces because they were ashamed of what they were doing, right? And I think that's just personal opinion that if you are in a democracy, the law enforcement should do things that would not get them doxxed and attacked by people, right? They should be doing things that they're not ashamed of. But if you have that difference of definition of the reason for why agents like ICE and Border Patrol exist, there's you're not going to get very far arguing with them. The most basic definition of Christian nationalism is when religious identity is fused and blended with national identity, right? When they become one, religious identity and national identity become one, and you can't tell the difference. And if that's the most basic definition, is not always a bad thing. I want to remind people that form of nationalism, religious nationalism, is not always a bad thing. For a long, long time, to be Mexican was to be Catholic, right? And Catholicism was deeply, deeply ingrained in Mexican identity, right? Including Mexican American identity. And that was not a bad thing, right? A lot of things that we take for granted as part of Mexican culture, um, they are inherently religious services, right? Even quinceañeras. A lot of people think quinceañeras are just a big birthday party, right? The Mexican version of Sweet 16. But it's a religious service. It's a whole liturgy, right? In the Catholic Church, a quinceañera, it starts at the church, and you have to go to service. The priest does a whole liturgy, right? It's a very, very religious practice, right? So for Mexicans, for Italians, right, for a long time, being Italian and being Catholic was very closely intertwined. And it wasn't always bad, and it doesn't have to be inherently bad. So that's what we have to remember. We just can't throw everything out, and it can be very empowering. So we shouldn't forget the positive parts of that. But then on the other hand, I'm sure most of us, given our current reality, we can go throughout human history and the history of religions and think of all the horrible things that religious nationalism has done, right? From the Crusades to the Taiping Rebellion in China, right? More recently, in the last few decades, right? The Sri Lanka with the mayors and the Buddhists, and Myanmar, Buddhists and Muslims, right? We know even more recently, the Catholics and the Protestants in Ireland, right? That was, more complicated than just nationalism, but religion can and does lead to things that are not good. But at the end of the day, um, I think we still have to recognize that nations need something to hold us together, right? We need an ideal, something that will make us a nation. Otherwise, there's just nothing to keep us together as a nation. For a long time in America, the myth of the American dream was something that kept this country together. Everybody who came here or was brought here, by their choice, has some commitment, right? That the meritocracy worked, right? If you work hard and follow the rules, you could get ahead. That has, and again, there are many books that has shown how it's not that it hasn't worked like that, especially in the last few decades. It's been mostly a myth. For since the founding days, the Constitution was supposed to be something that held this country together, and the ideals of freedom, freedom in this land was supposed to hold us together. And in the last few decades, we've the ways that both the Constitution and the ideals of freedom has failed. The great majority of the people who actually live here has been exposed. So that also has fallen away. Greg Grandin, one of a history professor at Yale, he wrote this book that won the Pulitzer that year, The End of the Myth. And he said the myth of the endless frontier was what kept America together. It was what brought people here, and the driving ideology, right? That there were no borders. You could do anything here. And when that myth collapsed, then we started building walls. That's when we went into protectionism. So today, now in America, we're at a time when we're still looking, when we don't have the the ideology that keeps us together as a nation, and that's why people are grasping whatever they can get a hold of, and that's why Christian nationalism and religious nationalism is one of them. It's easy. It works. It works because we don't have to do the hard work of digging deeper into what even the definition of freedom, right? Orlando Patterson, the sociologist, he wrote in his book on freedom. He said that the liberty, right, and the whole liberalism project, which is good, It brought freedom to a lot of people. But he reminds us that even the idea of freedom and what it is to be free had to be defined, right? Some people, somebody had to say what it meant to be free. And by giving freedom to certain groups of people, you created oppression for others because some people's freedom by the default meant oppressing the oppression of other people. And that's something we don't like to wrestle with. And it's so much easier. There's a very well-known scholar now, Patrick Deneen. He wrote a book called talking about the failure of liberalism, right? And he dismisses the entire project of liberalism, right? He says there was nothing good in liberalism. He goes all in on dismissing liberalism, and he's one of the favorite scholars and friends of the current vice president and many of the people who are he's been invited to Poland and in to give his share his thoughts on the negative aspects of liberalism in a lot of authoritarian regimes. So clearly, we shouldn't go all the way there, but we need to live in the with the complexity of what it means to be. We have to do the hard work, basically. Without doing the hard work, we go on. We can end up going on either extreme.
Tony, can I
Yes.
yes,
Mhm.
Brad put a question a few minutes ago in the chat. It says, by canon, are you referring to a new confession or creed that might go into the PCUSA Book of Confessions, or do you mean this word in a different sense?
Oh, I mean like books, a whole literature, right? When if you're teaching a class and you need to put together a syllabus, that's what I mean, right? The yeah, more in those lines. The confessions, they are what they are. I'm not a fan of coming up with new new confessions because I think the confession should only be about the core, right? And then the confession helps you live out your daily life. I don't think the confession should be a good core confession should be able to because I worry that if you have every few years you have a new confession, right? Then you start purity checking
Hmm.
my feeling, right? That you get into the nuance of okay, you have to believe this, right? You have to believe that, and something happens, and that's why I don't I'm very against the reactionary churches being reactionary. I think churches should lead, right? When Donald Trump put that racist video out, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, every preacher has to preach on this. Every preacher has to say something on Sunday on this." Do we? Do we really? I mean, I think it's racist, but do we have to react to everything this president? I mean, it's what they do, right? If you read books on authoritarians and dictators, the Ruth Benjia wrote this book called The Strong Man, right? She's an expert on Mussolini, and she's the strong man, fascist leaders throughout history. And they like this. They like to be the center of attention, but they're all micromanagers. They want to control what people think, right? And I don't think personally, I don't think churches sh- should should be distracted from so much of what's already from what kind of Jesus told us to do. Jesus kind of told us there are some things we should be doing. So that's long answer to whether it's confessions or books. But I meaning I mean books from the academic the canons in the academic sense, right? There are core books that no matter what discipline you're in, there are core books that you have to read. We don't have core books to understand what it is to be faithful in under our current conditions. So
Brad, is
yeah,
that
that's
Brad, do you want to follow up in any way? Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Um, no, that was there had been some discussion some years ago about the need for a new confession to address uh, the changes in social uh, views,
hmm
essentially on homosexuality, transgender rights, those kinds of things. And so I didn't know if this was kind of a this kind of along that same
Mm-hmm.
wavelength, or if you were meaning it in a different sense, and it sounds like you meant it in a different sense than
Yeah.
these kind of whispers that have been going on for a few years now of we
Mm-hmm.
need a new creed, we need a new confession to address these issues that really the Book of Confessions doesn't talk about, at least not in the
Mm-hmm.
explicit sense. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there other, since we have a question popping, are there other questions? Anything else that you want me to clarify or no? Yes, Anne.
Not a clear, well, it was sort of a clarification.
Mm-hmm.
I was writing in the chat, but my hands are not hitting the right
Mm-hmm.
keys. The people in my congregation are searching for faithful words to counteract this Christian nationalist narratives that are popping up around their dinner tables and their friend circles and so on. And when I read the founding documents of our nation, I do hear words of faith that aren't necessarily Christian. I think I heard you talk
Mm-hmm.
about how, nations need to have some type of a founding ethos or whatever it may be. You didn't use
Mm-hmm.
that word. I can't remember what you said. And I see that in our founding documents. And I see other nations that don't have these founding documents kind of flounder around to identify themselves. So I
Mm-hmm.
feel like there's some kind of faith-based narrative underlying our founding documents.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh
I'm
yeah.
and I'm
Mm-hmm.
certain that at the time the documents were signed and put into the world, they were thought to be Christian by some people, but not others. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what I'm searching for in what you're trying to say, are
Mm-hmm.
a faithful response that may not be overtly Christian, but nevertheless is kind of equips us to be able to respond
Yeah.
in the world. And I'm hoping you're going to talk
Mhm.
about that.
Yeah, yeah, I'm going to talk about that in the second part, and I am going to be overtly Christian. I am unapologetically Christian to in my version of Christianity. I will say more in the practical aspect. I think we have the keys. We have the answer that this the world is asking, right? We have what the world needs, and we need to be more unapologetically Christian, and it will make more sense as I say more, right? So I think if you look at overall the people who have a problem with Christian nationalism or any form of religious nationalism, at the end of the day, it comes down to making policies, right? That when theological convictions move into national policies, right? At least in America. In America, most of our problems with religious nationalism is that certain groups are taking their theological convictions and making it the law of the land for everybody. If that's your definition of Christian nationalism, right? That you want your theological convictions to be public policy and something that applies to everybody, then all of us here are Christian nationalists at some level, right? It's a problem for a lot of more progressive, PCUSA type of people because we haven't been doing it, but we had in the past. Right now, we haven't. And what our critique of what's happening now is that the MAGA people, the Trump supporters, in their version of Christian nationalism, they are passing the laws that they believe come from their theological conviction, and it's becoming the law of the land, right? They want Supreme Court justices to rule the way they believe their religious conviction leads them um, to turn into laws. But if you look back at some of the greatest progress in justice, right, through for justice in this country, that also came because of very strong unapologetic Christian convictions, right? Martin Luther King, he was the Reverend Martin Luther King. We've sanitized him and secularized him for public school so that it's just a public holiday. Thanks to Reagan. Ronald Reagan did that. Did you all know that? He opposed it, but then he signed into law and took credit. Ronald Reagan gave us a day off on on King's birthday, but he was always the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. And when you read his writing, when you hear his sermons, right? People call it speeches, but it was sermons. It was deeply biblical and deeply theological, deeply thoughtful. The man had a PhD in theology from the School of Theology, right? So the he, the way that our moral convictions, right, because they come from our religious and theological convictions, the way we want that to be lived out in public and often in public law, right, could be a version of Christian nationalism. And if you go back, the abolition of slavery, right, there was a lot of people, Christians, whose theological belief led them to say that it was inhumane, right? It was against the will of God to enslave people made in the image of God. And if you think about it, if Martin Luther King's version of Christianity was made into national policy, would you be okay with that? I don't know. I'm not saying everybody will say yes. Clearly, not everybody will say yes. But a lot of people will be okay with that, right? For us Presbyterians, if our fellow Presbyterian, the late Fred Rogers, if Mr. Rogers' version of Christianity was made into national policy, would you support that or would you fight against that? Would you call that Christian nationalism and try to pull him down? I don't know. I think, there is a Christianity for many of us in our tradition that it's more gracious and inclusive and loving, that I believe that this country would be better. There are, I have to say, some people on the Christian nationalists now who claim that Martin Luther King Jr. was a Christian nationalist, but we don't have to ascribe or assume or make up things. He talked about this. He criticized Christian nationalism. He said these Christian nationalists is a new religion, and he said Hitler and Mussolini were the new preachers of this. He said, and this is a quote from him, he said nationalism should lead to internationalism, right? And so he was not a Christian nationalist in what people are trying to make him out to be. By that he meant whatever you're fighting for if whatever your theological conviction you're fighting for to be the rule of the land for this nation, you should fight for all people, right? That's why nationalism should lead to internationalism, right? So if you believe in the living wage in the US, you should want a living wage for everybody in the world. If you believe in housing for all and healthcare for all and education for all, you should only fight for it here in the US. You should fight for it all around the world, which, by the way, a lot of places in the world already have those things for free. Their government provide these things. So King himself rejected the label of Christian nationalism. But nationalism itself, right? You can say that he believed in this country deeply and was deeply committed. I mean, literally gave his life to improve this country. So that's the nuance I want to interject so that we're not so quickly to dismiss Christian nationalism and nationalism altogether, right? That we can still be faithful and have a love for country and be faithful in our faith, in the way we practice our patriotism.
Tony, Lena had a question. She says, Is there a reason you separate Christian nationalism from religious nationalism when we see Christianity primarily being the religion of choice for religious nationalism in the US? Or did you differentiate because you are covering religious nationalism as a whole?
Well, because I don't want to get into the debate. It's mainly because I don't want to get into the debates of who's a real Christian, right? Because I don't believe in the purity, Christian purity test. I don't believe there's a quote unquote true Christian and everybody else is wrong, right? I think, we're all followers of Jesus, and we're all trying to follow Jesus faithfully in our own ways. And this is where why I believe evangelism is the answer, and not fighting, which is what I'm going to get into in the second half. But yeah, so I say religious because it is more reflective of what's happening, and it gets us out of the tendency to say I have the right Christianity and you have the wrong one type of idea. So it's just and it works the same way everywhere, right? So we have religious nationalism right now in Israel, right? Or very clear religious nationalism, but India, Hindu nationalism. But at the core of it, it's always the same. It always leads to oppression. It always leads to concentration of power and oppression of many. So I'm hoping that it would expand our definition and the magnitude of the challenge, right? So it's not just about one group of Christians who got it wrong and they're leading people astray. No, no, no. We are what we're facing, the challenge we're facing is much greater. And because I believe there's a lot of research out there that says you can't change minds, right? So I don't think it's useful for us to just debate unless somebody invites us to debate them, like Mike Johnson invited us, any Christian, to debate him on the border. So if we get invited, we should go. But I don't think we should invite conflict. We should. There's a lot we can do as as Christians on our own. And this is what I want to remind us, that when the MAGA people are talking about taking America back to a time when they said America was great, those were the days when Presbyterians were in charge. Our denomination, right? The PCA, the conservative Presbyterian, they didn't exist in those days. It was us Presbyterians, right? The reason why uh, out of many one, a pluribus unum, right, got replaced with one nation under God. That was Presbyterians who did that, right? Eisenhower was at a worship service in New York Avenue Presbyterian Church in Washington D.C. Right? He went to a service there because it was Abraham Lincoln's church, and he preached a sermon and basically said, if you're not a Christian, you're not an American, and that's when that was Presbyterian. That church is still PCUSA Church. That's our legacy, right? One of the most famous chaplains, right? Peter Marshall was a PCUSA guy, from Scotland, right? Can't get more Presbyterian than that. So, so we again, I want us to be more self-reflective and less judging, and so that's on the Christian part. On the nationalism part, and this is something I've been talking about with some of my other colleagues. She's a political scientist. I didn't get her permission to say her name, so I can tell you her name after, since this might go viral. But in our conversations, nationalism is really the wrong word to describe what's happening and what they're doing to this country, right? The people in power are doing to this country. It's not nationalism because they're not trying to build a nation, right? They're tearing down. So it's really anarchy, right? So if you want to call what's actually happening by definition, right, is some kind of religious anarchy, because these are people who are tearing things down for the sake of tearing them down without building anything, right? Dodge when Trump got into office, right, fire a bunch of people, cancel a bunch of stuff for no purpose other than to do it, right? It built nothing. It helped nothing to this country. It didn't help any citizens in this country. Nobody's prices went up. The whatever billion they claimed to save, none of it came back to the people. And not only was it a neutral thing, it was a negative thing, right? Reputationally, in practice, I have a lot of people who lived in DC in those days, and it was horrible, just horrible to everybody knew somebody who lost a job. And these are civic servants, right? People who could have done anything, but they chose to serve us through our government. So I think if you take anything from this, I hope you will stop calling them nationalists in anything they do and start adopting the language of anarchy, because that's what it is, right? We're living in a time when a memo overrides the Constitution of the United States, right? The Constitution, right? One person can dictate a memo and tell ICE to go into every house, go in there without warrant, arrest anybody you want, right? Which is against the Constitution, but the memo overrides it, right? One person can dictate it, right? Literally the definition of a dictator, right? And we're living under that, and it's all about destruction, tearing down, and concentration of power. So it would benefit us to move away from even giving giving language to this the wrong language to what we are experiencing, because it's not nationalism. We're not building a nation. We're not doing what's best. Certainly not what's best for this nation, and we're not doing what the majority of this nation wants. In a survey I think it came out in November last year, the great majority of Americans across the board, across political um, uh, commitments, said that immigrants were good for America, right? 80 some percent said immigrants are good for America, right? You go back even further, gun control, 90 some percent of Americans, right, want universal background check and some kind of gun control, right? 90-some% of Americans don't think that we should be out there with weapons of war. Average citizens should have weapons of war, but we don't have that, right? So this is again before this administration is exposing a lot of what's been happening, and yeah, I just think we need to give language to the right language to what's happening.
Tony, there was a couple of
Mhm.
related comments. Vanetta West,
Mhm.
I'm so glad that Vanetta's here. Vanetta's
Oh.
the leader for the workshop we have in October. And
Mhm.
she wrote, the most harmful dogmatic iteration of Christian nationalism includes a hierarchy of value. Um, Anne's comment made it skip up. The white Christian heterosexual upper class male is at the top. And then I think a related question from Mark Chapman, a related topic. Would you agree that one key tenet of so-called Christian nationalism is in the US is white supremacy? Is that not the key theme around which the nation hangs, despite the lofty claims in the founding documents? I was listening to hear that aspect of the question in your opening discussion of defining the term. Thank you.
Yeah, well, Professor Chapman is more of an expert on this than me, but I think it is, and I'm one of those who have in conversation. I don't know that we're fully there yet, but we're on the path. What's happening now and the groundwork that's being laid is really a form, well, not a form, but it is ethnic cleansing, right? Literally, they're coming after people because of the complexion of their skins, of the certain accent, of the type of work they do, right? The Supreme Court said this is okay to do. So it is targeting a very specific ethnicity, and to get rid of one a very specific ethnicity from this country, and that is ethnic cleansing, right? And I know people are going to say I'm being overly dramatic and whatnot, but what I call it as I see it, right? On the white supremacist issue, I think it's certainly there, but and it's a whole different workshop to get into the as Professor Chapman who know we can go for 2 hours explaining the history of white supremacy and the hegemonic idea that it is, right? But white supremacy is it's it's one of the main drivers only because it's the easiest one, right? And that's why the first people that both Hitler and for quite some time, queer and trans people were over the last year, they and even before then, right? Trans people were scapegoated because, right? Because queer people are always the first one they go after because they can pass, right? The people you want to get rid of, queer people and trans people could pass. So they have to get rid of them first. They have to go after them first. Get rid of those people first. And then the rest of us who look different, whose complexion is different, it's easier for them to come after us because they can just grab us off the street. But a trans and queer person, you don't know. You don't know. And so they have to do things to out those people and exclude those people. And that's why for a long time, there's been a long, trans people have been targeted. When you think of it rationally, again, from a sociological perspective, when you look at the numbers nationally, the numbers I mean, they were passing laws in school district with no sports to ban trans athletes to play in school district that had no sports, right? It was totally symbolic. It was just to scapegoat and again to out those people to exclude them from the very beginning because they can pass, right? So yes, white supremacy it's at the forefront, but it's also because it's the most superficial way. But I think the problem we're dealing are a lot deeper. I always remind people 52% of Border Patrol agents are Latinos, identified as Latinos. The two agents who shot and killed Alex Preddy were Latinos. I've been to the border, to the Mexico-US border, and the majority of the Border Patrol agent I saw there were Latinos, right? And we know that this current administration, the Christian nationalism or the MAGA is not exclusively white. Right? There are plenty of there's a group for those who are not in touch with HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. There's the Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk's organization, has a subdivision of just black activists in Turning Point USA that goes into HBCUs to cause trouble, right? They go from HBCU to HBCU just to get those got you videos, right? So yes to white supremacy, but also it's a lot deeper than than just white supremacy.
Tony, there's one
Yeah.
more question, and then
Mhm.
suggest you go on to the next part of your presentation. John Wall says, instead of anarchy, is it authoritarianism, power not with the people, but with the few?
Yeah, I think definitely authoritarianism, but authoritarianism, and this might explain a little bit more in the next part. But once you've had a democracy, no matter how badly it was practiced, and no, there's no perfect democracies, right? There's a book called Open Democracy by a Yale colleague. I forgot her name. It's a French lady, but Helen, but she does a history of different democracies, and democracy, there's no one perfect form, right? Clearly the US is not, but it's basically people getting together, right? And Danielle Allen from Harvard says in her book, Our Declaration, she said she highlights the humility of the founding fathers, right? That they put it in there that there could be amendments, right? They put this declaration, constitution, but they knew that they could be wrong, right? And it's written in there that the people, we the people, not we the citizens, no we the residents, right? We the people, anybody who's here, right? The Constitution, right? No, protects any person, anybody that's in this country. The Constitution protects, right? That's what it says. We the people, but it was written in there that we the people, right? Every generation we had to revise this document and have a collective agreement on what this what we want to commit to and what should drive our collective lives, right? Which I agree we should there's there are some things in there that clearly the amendments had to correct. I think there's not enough. There's the thing about the guns, probably I could probably do away with the second one with the about the guns, but that's as long as we have a democracy, that's a possibility for us to do. So the idea of what we do, right? I want to contextualize this with a story. So a few weeks ago, a friend of mine, a Latino pastor, Puerto Rican, he pastors a Spanish-speaking church. He texts me on Sunday night and he says, "Hey, a lady at my church told me that her son has been deported and she needs help." Right? He texted me because he knows I'm very involved in this work, helping people here in New York, and his church is in New York. So I said, when was he deported, right? Because if he's still here, if it's already been deported, or if it's been transferred somewhere in Louisiana or some other detention center, it all makes a difference. He says, "I don't know." I asked, "What country are they from?" He said, "I don't know." He says she only speaks Spanish. And I said, "Okay, do you have her number? Can you call her and ask?" So he sends me her number and writes, "Tell her the pastor told you to call her. Thank you." And I said, I wrote back, wait. I said, "You have to call her. You need to call her and you need to get this information, but only call if you're willing to walk this long journey with her, because if she doesn't speak any Spanish, she's going to need a lot of help walking through this to get her son back." And he texted back saying, "What, they don't speak Spanish there?" Right? Almost incredulous that these people who want to help immigrants don't speak Spanish. And my response to him was, there's no day. There's no day. It's all of us doing. I'm a pastor, right? I study sociology. I have no degree in law, but I'm trained to file habeas corpus on behalf of people who get taken, right? There's no they, it's just us. We just have to do what we can. And the assumption he had, because he's Puerto Rican and a US citizen, is that there were systems to help people in these precarious situations. But there's no they. And for a long time, there hasn't been. In New York City, you can get confused because there are a lot of nonprofits that helps migrants. But they're also all ran by other migrants, and they're raising money and volunteering. There's no professional day, right? Right now, our new mayor is trying to hire a bunch of immigration lawyers so that they can formally go to court and defend the residents of the city. But that hasn't been implemented yet. But there's no day, right? And that's what all of us need to understand with our attempt to be faithful under this age of authoritarianism. for it, that the system that we once assumed was there are no longer there, right? Most obvious, the Constitution, right? All of us thought, myself included, up until 2024, I thought I was under the protection of the US Constitution. And none of us are. The Constitution, that's how it works. When it doesn't protect one person, it doesn't protect anybody. We're now living without the protection of the US Constitution. The systems and the institution that we once relied upon are crumbling, and the safety net that we thought were there, for many, it was never there. But even for us, those of us who are privileged Presbyterians, even those are crumbling. And maybe that's part of the reason why you're here, why you're trying to figure out how do I do things, right? But all the institutions we once relied upon are now eroding, including those that are not part of the government, right? The definitions of the family, education, right? All these things that we took for granted, we can no longer take for granted, and not least the church, right? The Presbyterian Church we've been in decline for 40 years, and some people think we'll be in decline for another 40, although by the numbers, if you look at just the numbers, we won't last at this rate of decline. We won't last another 40. It's more like 10 or 15 before all the Presbyterians are gone, unless we do evangelism. So it doesn't have to be that way. But this is, again, Emile Durkheim calls this the times of anomie. Times of anomie for sociologists, it means times of change when the cultural norms and cultural assumptions are no longer valid. And we're left to have to rebuild and come to a new understanding, share understanding. And it can be extremely disorienting, right? Because what you thought was right is no longer right. What you thought was wrong is no longer wrong. Good and bad. All these things that we took for granted, that we thought was assumed, are no longer assumed, right? You used to be able to say, "I'm a Christian," and people knew more or less what you meant, right? You could even say you're a Presbyterian, and people know more or less what you meant, right? But now you can, right? Now first with young people especially, they don't know what a Presbyterian is, right? I work at a college campus. A lot of young people have no idea what a Presbyterian is. But in New York City, you have to explain what branch of Presbyterianism I am, because there's a lot of different Presbyterians. And if you think about that, having to do that not just with your faith and your church, but every aspect of your life, right? It's exhausting, right? For those of you who are white on this call, right? The level of exhaustion, right? To say that, to justify every day, to question your every action, to not be racist, right? Because you're seeing so much racism, right? And you have to do the mental calculation. It's exhausting. It's exhausting. And that's what times of anomie is, right? And it's not a coincidence that that Emile Durkheim wrote about anomie in a book he titled Suicide. So it's very, very serious to be lost in that way, because he said, as people who need meaning, right? When we are in times of anomie, we lose our purpose and meaning, and that leads us down a very tragic path. So what are we to do? I think the answer, like I said before, it's extremely Christian. We've had the answer for a long time. We just haven't been very good at practicing it. I think Bad Bunny was right? The only thing more powerful than hate is love. And I think you might think it's simplistic, but I think love, right? The command to love, which is in the gospel, what Jesus told us to do, is at the core level, the first thing we have to do. When you see people doing terrible things, when you see authoritarian regimes, when you're looking at the face of evil, deceit, cruelty, at the very least, the first thing you do should be to not imitate them. You see somebody doing evil, don't do that. Don't do what they're doing. We know this, but we haven't always been very good at practicing it, right? Jason Stanley, in his book, How Fascism Works, the subtitle for that book on fascism is The Politics of Us versus Them. When we do anything, when we speak things into this world that divides, right? That further draws a line in the sand of us versus them, we are playing into their playbook, right? We're contributing to the authoritarian agenda. Some of you might know Father Richard Rohr. These are Presbyterian. You'll know Richard Rohr, right? He wrote in his in one of his book. He said we all become well disguised mirrors of anything that we fight too long or too directly. That which we oppose determines the energy and frames the question after a while. Most frontal attacks on evil just produce another kind of evil in yourself, along with a very inflated self-image to boot. Right? So when we see evil and authoritarianism and cruelty, we cannot fight it with the same tool that they're using, right? This is where what Audre Lorde told us: you cannot dismantle the master's house. The master's tool will never dismantle the master's house. Jesus told us this in the gospel 2,000 years ago, right? When people of when we see and that's part of the reason why I hesitate to engage and debate and fight. Definitely not fight, but confront Christian nationalists, is because even if I win the argument, I would have contributed. I would have replicated what they were doing. Right? I would have created a further divide between us versus them. And so I think love is the way, and evangelism is the way. As mainline Christians, we don't like that word. We've given it up to evangelicals, but we used to have a department of the Presbyterian Church, right? We used to have a whole department on evangelism, and we used to give an award for the national award for churches that did evangelism well. I don't know if we still do that, but evangelism was at the core of what we did, and it's what we need now. If you look at the people who are doing this, right, the ICE agents and even the ICE agent who shot Rene Good and Alex Preddy and so many more, right? 20 plus people had already been killed before Rene Good and Alex Preddy were killed. There's something very wrong with what they're doing. And as Christians, we're called to have compassion on them, right? And Minneapolis is showing the way on this with the singing protest, right? One of the chants that they sing is lay down your weapons, come join us, right? They go to the hotels where ICE agents stay, and they sing beautiful singing in unison. Lay down your arms, come join us. That's what we're called to do as Christians, right? For many of you who have been pastors, we've all had church members who didn't agree with us, who were confrontational and troublemakers. We don't kick them out of the church, right? We sit down with them, we talk, and we might not have an agreement, but we still love them, right? As church, we have to love people into the if we really believe in the transformative power of the gospel, we have to believe is true for them all the way to the White House, right? That's why we I mean, Dr. West is here, so she's the expert on nonviolence. But this is why Kenyan nonviolence is so at the core. You don't show up at protests, and she's going to talk more about this when you'll have the workshop with her. You can't show up at a protest as a Christian with signs that call people pigs and with this hateful message. This is not in line with what Christ calling.
Tony, I'm going to just while you're taking a
Mhm.
breath,
Yeah.
Greg, Greg offered a comment I'd like to give you a chance to respond to, and Gregory, if you would like to say more about it, he says he talks about rejecting division, and I think that he means you, Tony.
Yep.
But all I have heard is us versus them, us enlightened people versus MAGA. So I'll
Mhm.
give you a chance to respond to that. And Greg, Gregory, if you'd like to say any more about it, I'd welcome that as well.
Mhm. Should I? Greg, did you want to
Go ahead
ahead?
and go first.
I think go
All
ahead.
I've heard,
Go ahead.
what I keep hearing is how wrong MAGA is, how evil Trump is, how the Constitution is gone, and
Mhm.
how enlightened we are. And anybody who's going to be thinking something like that is already worse than, at least as bad as the people that they're rejecting.
Mhm.
And that
So
would just
I
seem to
don't think
me,
I'm enlightened, right? So I think on and I don't think I've said, right? I say people who do evil acts, right? I don't think I've said Trump is evil. I don't personally. I don't use those terms because we are all made in the image of God. But I think, but that's also why I pull back from using the term Christian nationalism, because I don't want to get into the debates of who's a right Christian, who's a wrong Christian, right? That's why I use religious nationalism, and I think, well, the Constitution part, that's just reality. I don't think
it's
it's
not,
not
but it's
totally
not.
gone yet.
You're not willing to,
Mhm.
is you show me where the courts have ruled that what he's doing is wrong.
No,
I'll
no, the
take the,
code,
I'll straw man
yeah.
it.
No, yeah. And I asked. I have friends who teach in law school who are constitutional scholars, and the very reason why we're not technically in a constitutional crisis, right, is because all three branches of the government are in agreement with this, right? So that's on that piece, right? We're technically, definitionally, not in a constitutional crisis. But practically, you talk to people in Minneapolis, you talk to immigrants, you talk to people who are living in this country. The lived reality is that there is a crisis, right? The way we see what's happening in this country, and when you again when you look at the patterns of the things that are happening, and the things that have other authoritarian leaders have done, we are on the same path, right? Trump is doing exactly the same thing, and I also want to remind everybody that there's a right wing and a left wing authoritarianism, right? And it's not so simple, right? So there are plenty of left wing authoritarianism and fascism, even though fascism
Well,
technically
you
came out of
just
Italy.
taking not
Hmm.
anytime you toss in fascism, that's foolish. That's nowhere near what we're dealing with now. Anytime Hitler gets brought up, that shows a lack of perspective entirely. But even from what
Hmm.
you're saying, the people protesting in Minneapolis, we'll start with that one. They are breaking the law in their protests. I mean, there's no constitutional crisis because they have rights to do so, but they are rioting and breaking things. and they are being allowed to do it. If there was a constitutional crisis, that would not be they wouldn't be allowed to. If we had a dictator, they would be shut down. And they're doing it because they think they know what is right, and they're actually rejecting the law, which is, if you wanted to use evil, extreme terms, you'd be saying insurrection. And I'm not saying that, neither are you.
Wait,
But the fact that
George Gregory,
Yeah.
may I interrupt you? Because there's a way to break the law that is also called civil disobedience. And I think you're maybe crossing, you may be being a little too definitive. And I think one of the acts of love that we can practice is understanding one another's perspective so clearly that we do not bear false witness against them. And so I just wanted to clarify that breaking the law is sometimes civil disobedience, which is perfectly in terms of our government. So, okay, good. Because it sounded like we're being very,
and we justify ourselves in our enlightenment by being willing to break to do that civil disobedience.
So on the term fascism, right? So I'm not the first one to use it, and like I said, literally the scholar on fascism and many others people who study these more than me have used it. The road to authoritarianism is never a cliff, right? It's not like we're democracy one day and the next day we're authoritarian. It's always a descent, right? And you can look at this throughout history, right? Adolf Hitler was democratically elected, right? And he had democratic powers. Maduro was so-called democratically elected. You know, Cesar Chavez, when he first came to power, he had overwhelming support. He was democratically elected. So we never get to the, you know, we can't wait to use a term until we're fully there, because again, with authoritarianism, we are already on the road to authoritarianism, right? So it's you know, we can try to parse it out here and there, but this is a reality, right? When memos from department heads, secretary, non-elected officials, appointed officials, can overwrite, right, the searching, going into people's homes to search for individuals without a warrant and such. On Minneapolis, we can talk specifically about Alex Preddy and Rene Good in those cases, but again, like I said before, the difference in definitions, people see completely different things. But Alex Preddy specifically, he was not breaking any law, right? Because it is within the law of every citizen, right? He was standing on a public street and he was recording, right? Even the gun that he had a permit for that gun, and he was shot. And so we can debate the legalities of whether he was shot, but I think, again, in the history of authoritarianism and fascism, people are told not to believe what they see with their eyes, right? And as soon as he was killed, right, the one narrative out of this administration, it was that they even say he was waving a gun and he wanted to do, you know, in their words, maximum damage, right? And we all saw in the videos, right? And eventually they admitted that he was not trying to cause maximum harm. He never took out his gun. He only had a cell phone, right? So I think it's important to, you know, truth is important in a time when so many things are being said. I think especially for Christians, for those of us who follow somebody who says he was the way, the truth, and the life, you know, we have to speak the truth. And yeah, I think that this is again the politics of us versus them is at the core of what the public narrative and those in power are trying to do, and they're not the only ones, right? So I will say that there are plenty of people on the left who are imitating the tactics of the right. And if we're not careful with that, we are going to end up with a left-wing fascism, which in many countries, in my country, in Argentina, we've had both forms of authoritarianism.
Gregory,
And
thank
that's why I worry about aggressive
you.
civil disobedience. Sorry to
Greg,
take up your time.
Gregory, thank you. I'm so happy that
Mhm.
that you did speak. Thank you very much. And thank you for you all to talk together. And I'm going to invite Tony to keep moving ahead.
Oh, are there other questions?
Bruce says,
Were there
eventually
other?
more about evangelism. What do you think
Mhm.
of evangel or good news in contrast to fundamentalists say this prayer and get into heaven?
Well, so evangelism, that's how they define it, right? Evangelism was making disciples, right? And it's very hard to make disciples. Even the ones that Jesus made were messed up, right? They all ran out on him. So that's a lifelong process, and ultimately it's a relationship, right? So at the most practical level, if you have people who you think needs to be transformed by the love of Jesus Christ, invite them over for dinner and build that relationship. And I always say this to my white brothers and sisters, you can do this with people that I cannot, right? That's a power that you have that I don't, right? They will sit down with you, and they will be more likely to talk to you. I talk to, I have family members who disagree with me on these things, and I still talk to them, right? I still have, I very, very intentionally want to keep those relationships because I think together, because again, I could be wrong too, right? So maybe together we can find out how to be faithful together. But I think the having a genuine care and love and compassion for the people who are doing this and speaking these things into this world, for the elected leaders, right? To truly praying for them, right? I think it's important to show up at these protests. And but how different would it be, right? If you showed up to tell this ICE agent that God loves them, and you go there for the purpose of helping them understand, right? That the same God who loves them loves the people they're trying to arrest, right? We can lose our hope or the confidence that the love of God can transform people, and it does transform people. I think many of us are here because we've been transformed, right? And so if the gospel and the grace of the amazing grace is good enough to transform us, it has to be good enough to transform them, right? This again, if you have an expansive, inclusive vision of Christianity, you will believe that yeah, that the love of God can transform these people, and they don't have to keep living this way. What I do push back on evangelism and the popular version of evangelism, which was never in the Bible. I always talk about neoliberalism. Neoliberalism infiltrated the church in a terrible, terrible way, and we ended up running churches like as a free market capitalist enterprise, which was never supposed to be that. And so evangelism for a great part of America, it was about the three B's: building, book deal, and butts on the seat, right? It's about number and influence and money, right? If you look at the history again from my as a sociologist, the rise of mega churches coincided with the rise of malls in America. And the same people who designed the malls in America were designing mega churches, right? So it was totally, totally based on a market model, and that's what did us in, right? We started running corporations, right? And entrepreneurship enter the language of churches, right? And seminaries, right? We started telling churches that they have to find ways to increase income. That was never supposed to be the goal of the church and evangelism, right? We were told to make disciples. There's not much in there about where their tithe, where their offerings go, or where their formal membership is. And I think that's what we have to regain. That's what we have to to live out the more, I think, original. I don't want to say biblical, but a newer, a different definition, or more expansive vision of evangelism that's not tied to one individual church, to church giving specifically. The so the second thing that we need to do, and I think in addition to evangelism, and this will increase our chance to evangelism, is that, like I said, we are living in a form of anarchy right now, and the anarchists who were hardcore anarchists, which is a model I don't recommend, but the anarchists, when they were tearing everything down, they came up with the idea of mutual aid, right? They literally wrote books on mutual aid because they said all the systems are corrupt, all the governments are corrupt, let's destroy everything, right? That's why they're anarchists. And instead, we just help ourselves. We will be our own saviors. We're just going to help ourselves. Nowadays, a lot of the networks I'm plugged into who are helping people are all mutual aid groups. But if you look at what mutual aid is really Acts 2 in the Bible, right? We're told that when this group of people became Christians, right, they came together, they met and ate, and they had everything in common. There were no professionals. Nobody went to seminary in those days. There were no formal leaders other than the apostles, but the apostles weren't there with them, right? The apostles were just a few. So each group, they were meeting in people's homes, right? It was very informal. That was the church. Everybody did what they could, and they contributed what they could, and they helped each other out. That's what mutual aid is. So the anarchists knew that when the social and political systems and the government is no longer there for you, we have to be there for each other. And if you look at the history of the US, of a lot of the work towards justice, it was really all mutual aid, right? The Underground Railroad was mutual aid, right? That liberated so many slaves, which, by the way, it was illegal. They broke the law to free slaves. Um, the entire civil rights movement, right? All these it wasn't king coming in and telling everybody what to do. They were entire people just helping each other out because the system excluded them. They literally could not get into schools, and certainly not unions. There was little they could do, so they came together and helped themselves. A lot of these were based in churches, but they learned this, right? Not from the anarchists. They weren't reading those books in Russian. I think they're translated now, but they were learning that from the gospel, right? A lot of the the ministries that serve people who have been in the justice system, right? They're essentially mutual aid groups, right? Professor Mark Chapman is here, and we were colleagues briefly at a program in Sing Sing Correctional Facility here in New York. And he's been teaching since very early in the beginning of that program. That was essentially mutual aid. One guy, a pastor, saw this need because our correction system doesn't redeem people, right? It's a system to dehumanize and essentially to get rid of people. But one pastor didn't think this is what God wanted us to do, so he went in there and took a seminary in there and started teaching classes, and then average citizens, average people, churches joined him, and they helped these people, gave them places to live. It was all mutual aid, right? So in our way, as we think of how to be faithful in these days, it's critical for us to plug in with many of the people who are already in our communities, right? Wherever you live, no matter where you live, look for the people who have been pushed furthest out on the margins. They have the mutual aid networks because they could never rely on the official systems. So for those of you for whom the system was built for, right? For those of you for a long time, right? You've had the safety nets, the things work for you, and now things are not working. Look for them. Look for the mutual aid groups that are already in existence. Most of the rapid response groups, right? These are all mutual aid groups, right? The groups the networks that Rene Good and Alex Preddy were part of. There are no leaders. They're just community members who get together and they want to help their neighbors. And none of them are professionals. You don't need, to get a certificate, right? We like certificates, but you don't need to get a certificate in mutual aid. You just have to make yourself available. And more importantly, for the most difficult part, I think, for people who live in privilege, you have to be able to be willing to accept aid. Accepting aid sometimes is a lot more difficult than giving it because Presbyterians in general, on average, we are people of means and privilege, and we're not used to being in an uncomfortable place of not knowing what to do and needing to receive help and needing to receive guidance. And there's a book called The Rise of Christendom. Rodney Stark wrote that book. Academically, you can go into academics like to critique, so we critique everything. So there are parts of the books I can critique, but he argues that the rise of Christianity in the early century, in the early church, was all because of this type of mutual aid. When people were sick, the normal thing to do was to get rid of them, leave them out to die, and Christians didn't do that. All right, Christians were taking in these people. Right, I read somewhere that the average lifespan of a widow in the ancient Near East was a few weeks. Right, so because women were not considered fully human in those days, so if a woman became a widow within a few weeks, she would die. And the children would die. But then Christians came along and they said, no, that's no good. And we know it in the Bible, right? The entire deacons, the office of the deacon was created so they could care for the widows and the orphans, so they would not die within a few weeks, right? So these are and again, no certificates, no professionals, just people willing to help. And by the way, that's also how we build a democracy more than ever now. Right? The individualism, again, as a result of the neoliberalist ideas that has infiltrated every aspect of modern life, we have become hyper individualized. We want to depend on no one, and you can't have a democracy when you don't trust your neighbors, you don't know your neighbors, and again, you have no care for your neighbors. I think the pandemic showed us, we didn't learn the lesson, but the pandemic showed us that no matter what your socioeconomic status is, we're all in this together, right? When the pandemic hit, all of us were equally susceptible. Your social status, your race, your money will not protect you. That's what's happening now, right? And that's why I learned from Dr. Vonera West that white people shouldn't call themselves allies, right? Allies in war, allies are, you're a safe country, but an ally is in trouble, so you go help. Immigrants and people of color, sure, we're targeted right now, but this is all of us, right? We're targeted first, but all of us, right? This is the fight that all of us need to be engaged in. This is the democracy all of us need to defend. All of us need to rebuild a stronger democracy. So we're not looking for allies. We all need to be be aware of how each one of us is the dangers that's before each one of us. And I should put a plug in for our national conference, the Center for Public Theology and Public Policy, where I work. Our national conference is in April 12th to 14th at New Haven, and we're going to bring in a national panel of experts to dig in a lot deeper on many of these issues. So let's talk. There's questions, ideas. We have about 15 minutes.
And maybe now feel free to just raise your Zoom hand,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll call on you. Or if there's not a lot going, you can just unmute yourself and go ahead and speak. Tina, go ahead.
Earlier, Tony, you mentioned that we need a language to address what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
We have the language of the gospel. How else do we find that language? Is there language outside of the gospel that we should also be looking to?
Yeah, this is where, again, I'm answering not as a sociologist or a pastor. Well, I'm answering as a sociologist, not as a theologian or as a pastor. As a sociologist, language is what we come up with together in community, right? So I think we absolutely need new and better language, but language, of course, and here it is from the gospel, right? In Genesis 1, language is power, right? The word, as Christians, as those made in the image of God, the words have power. Max Weber, right, made it very clear that ideas have power and consequences in the real world. But these are the times when we need to be in community to come up with that language and that new understanding. And because of how fractured our country is, we need to start with a hyper local, right? So we need to start those conversations with which our own communities, those around us, not those who are like us, right? But those who are closest to us. I think that's when you begin to gain the language, and we need to. I always tell people we need to be uncomfortable, right? If you're into exercise and working out, right? You're sore after you lift weights, right? Because you tore your muscles, and now they're rebuilding. They're going to come back stronger. We are in a culture that avoids all pain, right? And we're in a place where we try to avoid all conflict and tension in communities. And so we've literally weakened our social muscle because we're not willing to live with that discomfort and that soreness. And that's something I think we need to look for, right? I tried to look for, right? I intentionally want to engage with people who are different from me. But yeah, community is where you come up with a new language.
And each community will find its own way.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Tony, I failed to see a question that Brad put in about half an hour ago. Do you find that nationalism, religious or otherwise, goes in tandem with authoritarianism / fascism / the like? Or is nationalism more closely related to a perfectly balanced rock of Sisyphus, and that nationalism can easily turn into a tool for authoritarians and fascists, but that the two are separate yet complementary thought systems? Brad, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah.
So, my question. Okay, there we go.
Yep.
Let's say it would help if I put the microphone down. Anyway, so my thought in this is looking at it in the sense of, okay, there was Christian nationalism in Third Reich Germany. We're looking at religious / Christian nationalism, at least Christian, being the predominant flavor of the religious nationalism we're seeing right now in our country. And I mean, whether or not we like to call the road we're on the road to authoritarianism or fascism is up for debate. But I mean, just the fact that we have this nationalism going in tandem with all of these declines and spirals into fascism and authoritarianism, all of these things. My question is, do you are you seeing that these two things are basically two things in the same vein? Or is it we have nationalism that is its own thought, its own belief, but it's kind of like the rock in the myth of Sisyphus, in that, okay, we're getting to the mountaintop, it's balanced, but it can easily roll down that mountain and become one in the same with the fascism, the authoritarianism that's on the other side of the mountain, for lack of a better image.
Yeah. So personally, I think nationalism is not inherently bad. It doesn't have to be inherently bad, but it can lead us to bad places. Religious anything, I'm very worried about religious anything, because again, by definition, sociologically, by definition, according to Durkheim, religion are a set of moral values that divides the sacred and the profane, right? What's acceptable and what's not acceptable, and that is fine at a individual level, but when you start putting it in other things, I get worried, right? Again, I'm not saying every form is bad, but I get worried, and I can only speak as a Christian, right? As a Christian, I mean, we can get into the weeds of this, but even the idea of Christianity, right? It's it's a questionable thing to define in the Bible. It's just a term, right? A word we use that's easier to define what a follower of Jesus is. But in all the Gospels and Paul's letters, right, it was all about following Jesus, right? So, it- and also if you again for me, the 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 whole point of the gospel and the life of Jesus, right? It was very um, it was antithetical to the structures of powers of this world, right? And nationalism, when it takes when it goes badly, it's always about power, right? So yeah, I think the it's for me, it's best to separate it. And there's nothing wrong with being Christian, and nothing wrong with nationalism in itself, but both can lead people to wrong places. I think humility is needed in approaching both, which again, it's in the Bible, right? So I think if we approach both from with the attitude of humility and the possibility that we could be wrong, right? That these are shifting ideas and things that we're building, right? Again, from a sociological perspective, cultures and religion, part of culture, are dialectical, right? Culture, it makes us, but we also make it, right? And these are things that are constantly in dialogue. And so if we keep that in mind, right? We could have an idea of a nation, but if we're open to be wrong and change and evolve, it's fine, right? It shouldn't lead to destructive oppressive systems.
How about another question or comment? I don't see any, so I think this is our chance to thank Tony. So let's give him some happy hands again. Tony, thank you very, very much.
Oh,
For
thank you. Thank you
yeah,
all for coming.
yeah, it's been just great to hear from you and to learn from you. Let me close us in prayer and remind you that the next one of these workshops will be in April. I don't have quite have the date um, tacked down yet, but I'll send you an email. I'll also send you an email when the registrations are up for are ready for all of the upcoming workshops, so you'll be able to sign up. So let's pray and thank God for this conversation. Gracious God, thank you for Tony, for the wisdom that he brought, the care that he has brought. God, we want to be faithful to you. We want to be faithful followers of Jesus. Use this conversation towards that end. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you, everybody.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank
Bye.
you. Yeah. And feel free to reach out to me. You can, I think I'm searchable I'm on Yale's website. So always happy to continue the conversation.